Hello and welcome everyone to this session here at the Presencing the Heating Skies. And I've been getting people sort of mispronouncing that, and we pulled it up. But presencing being making the future into the present and being in the moment. So it's a very pertinent title. And this event number 6, linking the sciences with engineering and culture, and looking at different aspects of creating spaces within culture for experimentation, research and collaborations, and sort of moving forward with these partnerships. So I've got two really good speakers, and I'm just going to go straight ahead and ask Marcela please to introduce herself, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Jamie, and thank you for inviting me to this great event. I'm very happy and very happy with what I'm hearing. It has been fantastic so far. And so my name is Marcela Bruckner. I work at DC3, and I'm a colleague of Mark and Sergio, who presented yesterday. And I joined DC3 last year, 1 year ago, a little bit more than 1 year ago. And before I was in the Netherlands. I was for a long time working in the University of Twente, and I was teaching there to engineering students. And this is part of what I'm going to share today. And well, my work is in collective decision-making processes, is how people make decisions collectively over a natural resource under climate change. So I work a lot with people, actually. And my background is very multidisciplinary, I would say transdisciplinary, mixing a lot computer sciences, engineering, and then somehow life brought me to the social sciences and the humanity, and this is why I'm now sharing this space with you. So what I want to talk today is an experience we had 2 years ago at the University of Twente and with engineering students, and a little bit of setting here. Would you mind the next slide? We have this project called Beyond Technology, that was founded by the Andrea van Braun Foundation in Germany. And teaching in the University of Twente, I was teaching at the graduate student in the engineering department. And I was teaching water management. And I had to teach, these students are very technical oriented, and this happens in the Netherlands, who knows a lot about water. So students are very, and particularly students, engineering students are very technical in the sense of very well trained in the math, in the statistics and the engineering, and very well prepared to find hardcore solutions and technical solutions to water problems. For example, building dikes, hiring dikes, and doing all sorts of management. And one of the things that misses in that setting, in that program, in those programs in general, although this is slowly changing, it's the link with culture and the realization that whatever materials, that these material solutions they are creating and actually exerting a change in the society to which the society will respond. But to teach engineering students that has been trained for already 5 or 6 years into engineering, hardcore engineering and math, to teach those concepts, it's far from easy. So many years ago, it started in 2015, we got together with Jacqueline Herema, my colleague, one of my colleagues in this project. And we says, okay, here we need the humanities, we need the arts to help us, because we are having this problem of, like, how do you teach this? How do you bring this human dimension into this understanding, into the understanding of this very technical understanding of what the world is? So with Jacqueline, we started talking about these collaborations of what we could do. And so then as time passed by, we got together with Marika Meister and Fabia Kikema, who were both teaching in the art faculty to art students. So we devised this project Beyond Technology, which was very difficult at the beginning to find funds for. So it took a while until we could implement it. So would you mind the next slide, Jamie, please? So this was the big challenge we aim to address, how we as educators are preparing the professionals, the water professionals for the future, to think more comprehensible and to know how to address these complex challenges that also involve humans in it, and human interactions and human relationships. So, next slide. So this was the pilot project. Finally, we got money through the foundations to create this pilot project, and we brought together students from the arts with students from engineering. So at that time, as I said, I was teaching water management, so I found some students volunteered to participate in this project. This was a completely a side project for them. So these students, the ones that participated, they already were kind through my classes, aware of how important it was, all this human side, working with the stakeholders, etc. So we have a group of students that wanted to participate in this very long, it was more than 6-month project, which is long because it's at the university courses are structured in a quartile. So we have these volunteers, and then we have also a course in design from the arts. So we started working in groups. We organized 6 groups with mixed groups, mixing artists and engineers. Would you mind the next slide, Jamie? And what we made, the things that they had to do was we made them to define a water challenge they want to address. This was mainly aimed, we started working with these engineering students, they were water specialists, and so they had to define what was the type of challenge that was moving for them. So they came up with something that has to be invisible, interdependent, and with an element of surprise. So finally, as the program went on, the challenge was defined was narrow to being addressing pharmaceuticals in water. Pharmaceuticals in water are super huge problems. I mean, in determining the water quality. And at the moment, I was working in a regional project there. So we used also a lot of information we have about that project and how pharmaceuticals that we consumed and farmers consumes, get into the water and generate kind of disasters, and it are very difficult also to be taken out of that. So this was a very interesting problem for them. And so then, together with the art students, we follow with this problem definition, with this problem, we follow these 4 steps. And this is where the art, this is actually methodology that the artist brought to that. These 4 steps of exploring, collect, share, and learn. If I could see that from the engineering perspective, things are defined very different because people define the problems, the students will go with a lot of literatures and things, and will try to find the solutions in a very linear way, I would say. But here they were exposed to these iterative cycles of exploring, collecting, sharing, and learning. And this was very, very interesting, particularly for the engineering students. Would you mind the next slide? And so one of the things the program was in this phase, in this cycle of these 4 processes, the program involved a lot of face-to-face meetings, field trips, artist talks, a lot of presentations, a lot of chatting together, and a lot of walking together and doing visits, for example, to water treatment plants, bringing artists to talk to us, or for example, on one occasions, 2 young artists from Amsterdam came, and we went through the river, and we connect the vegetation of the river and with the water, and through eating the plants that were able to be eaten. So we had a lot of experiences, experiences through the environment that were very, very novel for our engineering students, particularly. Next slide. And So from the 6 groups we have, one of the groups, for example, each group determined what they wanted to do with this pharmaceutical problem. And so for one of the groups, they came, this was, Robin was the engineering students, and then there were 2 others were the artists. And they came to the conclusions that the municipality of Almelo is the city where they were living in the Netherlands, knew about the problem of pharmaceutical in waters, but they didn't, while the municipality knew, people did not know. So they found the need of working in awareness raising. And the next slide. And so what they did, they created this giant things, the giant aspirins and this, I don't know the name in English of the, this yellow thing, it's for the injections. And they throw them in the water. So people would go and will see them and kind of visualize what it was invisible in the water, but in these giant forms. Then, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the next slide, Jamie. And then there was another group that they started to address the problem through what we eat. And so they created, their project was called Drug Dinner, and they wanted to start these conversations about medicine used and how they get into our bodies. So what they did, next slide, Jamie. What they did, they create breads and pieces of bread that were full of medicines into that and visualize the problems and started the dialogue through that. And then there was another group. Next slide, please, Jamie. So they wanted to visualize that in the water. We visualized the pharmaceuticals in the water they were drinking. So they developed a series of experiments. Would you pass the next one? Thank you. They developed a series of experiments in which, in different forms, they mix water with different medicines. So this was, then when we asked, so the 6 groups came, there was a web page that is also, it's indicated here in the presentations, where you can look at all the 4 groups and explanations and of what they did, and also there is a magazine that we created. And when we were asking, it was about the full experience, how students have lived this. Next slide, Jamie. We have different answers regarding about what they have learned. For example, there was one of the things that there was this mismatch in how, at the beginning, there was this mismatch of how we are going to address these problems. But then we found that maybe the difference were not so. And these are answers that the students gave. I have learned that our problem-solving skills were quite equal. The engineers were more thinking about effectiveness in data and were very good in writing text, while the artists were finding great concepts which were easy to understand for everyone. It could really give each other a boost. Or another one says, I felt a little bit sad when I discovered that the engineers were so much focused on writing, and they maybe missed the point of influence art could have. And the next one, please. Or we have for someone, it was a very difficult, this was an engineering student, for someone, a process that was very, very difficult and uncomfortable. So this person, he said, no, unfortunately, it was not a learning process at all. Or maybe, yes, I understood working without any constraints or final solutions is not my strong suit. I do not like working in the way the project evolved. Regarding the topic itself, I learned nothing more than what I already knew. And next slide, Jamie, please. And these are also comments we received from the students that were very, very valuable and very, very positive, actually. about the whole process and about what an art and engineering co-production was. Well, they says that together a bigger goal can be reached. Art and sciences need each other. Art is about telling stories, and I think that science exists to create more knowledge to talk about. Both are really needed to make changes in the world. Another person said, science and art do not need each other. They can complement each other and have results greater than the sum of both. And next slide. So these were the participants, and this was, well, the participants and all of the presenters and all the people that, including also the students. So, and it was an awesome project. It was a very time-consuming project too, but I think it was a super good and learning experience for both students, for us, and for all the extended community that also participated in it.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. And what I'm going to do now is I've got a film to show of a colleague from the University of Birmingham, Dr. Catherine Walker, who's in the Geography and Environmental Sciences, a teaching fellow in Human Geography. And she's recorded a film because unfortunately can't make it today. So I'm just going to share that with you. So
my name is Catherine Walker, and I'm currently based in Birmingham. I work as a teaching fellow in geography, working on research projects that focus mostly on young people and responses to climate change. It's great to be able to talk to young people, because I guess young people are very much at the heart of my what I research about. I'm really interested in how children and then adolescents, young people respond to messages about the environment, respond to messages about potentially how the environment is at risk, how it's changing, but also how there's much to celebrate in our environments, and there's the beauty of the natural world. And so I'm really interested in how children and young people are learning about these things, what you're learning about in schools, but also how you make connections between everyday experiences, what you see on your way to school or on your way around your community, and those messages about potentially climate change, how our climate's changing, etc. So I'm interested in just how children and young people growing up in this age where we talk about climate change a lot, how you are kind of processing these things and what your priorities are, really, what you think you and others can be doing to act on any concerns that you might have about climate change. Working with children to produce kind of cognitive maps of their local communities, and then doing mobile interviews where they would actually use that cognitive map to take me around the community. And I do also do interviews and focus groups, and in my PhD research I used photos as well, photo elicitation, to get children to be talking about their environmental concerns. And then subsequently I've worked on projects where again we've used different mapping methods. And so my topic as a whole, I guess, is how children relate to their everyday environments, and how they relate their everyday experiences of their environments to what I term the big environmental issues kind of facing children, but facing all of us. So it's that kind of connection between the everyday environment and then the kind of big environmental concerns. And I'm in geography at the moment, but I guess more broadly I would call myself a social scientist. But probably the methods I used are more sort of have been developed the most in geography.
Could you talk about any light bulb moments that you might have had in your childhood or growing up that led you to your career?
That's a really good question. I mean, yeah, I guess having the chance to go and spend a year in Chile before I went to university I think that has really started a love of travel, but I guess it's broadened my mind in a way that it couldn't have been broadened just by reading about a place or watching documentaries. Actually going and living somewhere that was very different to the context I'd grown up in and getting very, very immersed in a particular culture. I guess it's given me a sense of people think in different ways, and there's no right or wrong way to think about things, and but a lot of how people think about things is related to the context in which they've grown up, the cultural norms, how much availability of resources and options and kind of life options and things there are. And so I guess, having that opportunity to spend a year overseas as an 18-year-old was quite formative.
The 5 elements: earth, air, space, water, fire. Could you place your work and the way you think about your work into one of the elements?
Probably earth. I guess a sense of rootedness. Yeah, I think I am very interested. I guess what I was just saying there as I talked about kind of time in Chile, that about how everybody has different ways of seeing the world, and it has to do with the context in which they've grown up and I guess their roots in a particular place.
Thank you. How do you personally deal with the kind of issues about climate change?
And then I spent a lot of time in my PhD reading about how sort of individual behaviour change models are flawed, and that really what we need is kind of structural change, government changing government policies, etc. And obviously what everybody as individuals can do is quite it's constrained by the context in which they're in. So that was quite hard, because I guess it sort of caused me to question a bit, well, why am I even bothering sorting my recycling, etc., when actually what we really need is kind of structural change, or I guess as people like Naomi Klein would say, like system change. But I think now I see it more of as a both and, that I do still think that we do need structural systemic change, and I think that we need to be calling on governments for that. And it's really exciting seeing how the youth strikes for climate have really had an impact, and I do think that those kinds of direct actions are really important, maybe not in actually changing government policy, but although that is the ultimate aim, but also just in sort of awakening the public to the fact that so many people care about these issues.
There is a question about making data warm, but I think you've answered that really. That your research methods are very user-friendly. I don't know if there's anything you could add to that.
I guess it goes back to this kind of idea of rootedness. And I think what was good in my PhD research, which was part of a larger project, it was really interesting going to the family home and talking through kind of everyday life in the place where it happens, rather than just sitting in a school classroom with the children. I like, if possible, being able to do research kind of in the place where everyday life happens.
Could you talk about beauty in your subject?
Yeah, it's not really something, I have to say, it's not really something that I kind of think about that much in relation to the topics that I research on, but it is important, because I guess it's that love of what's valuable to us, what's valuable to the research participants. Why is it concerning that that valued aspects of their environments are kind of potentially being destroyed or could be? I guess it's because because we recognise value in them, beauty is one of the ways that we recognise values. So I think when I've been to the some of the youth strikes for climate, I've been really, I've felt most hopeful when I've seen different generations together, you know, grandparents who've brought their grandchildren along, or I remember having a conversation with a pregnant woman who was actually very kind of emotional, she just popped out during her lunch break and just wanted to see what was going on, and kind of was talking about how she was encouraged by seeing this, that the child that she was carrying was you know, at least coming into a world where people care about these things. So I think, yeah, generations working together, I think, is what I would most like to see happening, and not, I think the media can sometimes pit one generation against another, but actually just remembering that we are all in it together.
Great. Great. Thank you very much for bearing with me with that. Yeah, so now I'd just like to pass on now to Andy. Andy Fries is a kind of inspirational figure for me. I remember, and yeah, you are, although we've only met the once, but it was an important time because it was Hay. Andy works his long time working at Hay Festival and runs the sustainable. I'm sure he'll tell you more than I know, but it's the key figure there. And it was in Hay that I first sort of thought about potentially running a project like this, and this was quite a few years ago. And quite a few years ago, I did contact Andy and Kane, had a conversation, and he put me on to the pathway of speaking to other people. So it's a privilege to ask you now, Andy, to talk a little bit about yourself and about your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, that's very kind. Let me share my screen. Right, hopefully you can all see that. My name is Andy Fries, and I work partly for Hay Festival. I am the Sustainability Director there, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the festival itself to give some background, and then I'll talk a bit about how we work with scientists and engineers in sort of cooperating and treating festivals as places to play. So I'm going to be talking about festivals and events as research centres, as places to experiment, and as drivers of change. A little bit of background. Hay Festival itself is, our first festival was 33 years ago. Hay-on-Wye is a tiny little town, 1,500 people population, right on the border of Wales and England, and obviously experiencing interesting times now with lockdown. I actually live over the border in England and work in Wales, and it's been confusing to say the least. Anyway, this is an aerial shot of the festival site, just on the edge of town. It's a greenfield site. Most of the year it has sheep on, and then we build this tented village for the duration. So not including last year, or this year rather, 2020. This festival takes place in May. Obviously we were in lockdown. This year went digital, but in normal years this is what it looks like. And we normally have 700 or 800 different events taking place over 11 days. Approximately 120,000 people come. And as Sustainability Director, it's my job to try and maximise the benefits and minimise the negative impacts. So this year, 2020, we went digital, and we had a fully virtual format. I think we had about 6 weeks to turn it around from cancellation of the main festival to going live with our digital broadcast. And I think it was around about 500,000 sign-ups. Viewings were around about 200,000 on top, so as in actual events being watched. And we reached into 79 different countries around the world. So a very different kind of impact, but still large. We also run festivals all around the world. We've just finished our festival in Peru last weekend, but we run them in Colombia, Peru, Spain. We just ran one in Croatia a few months ago. We've run them in Nairobi, in Beirut, in the Maldives, in Kenya. Lots of different places around the world. Similar sort of format. We believe in getting the best of the best, exploring ideas and celebrating all elements of life, science, literature, arts, music, you name it. We try and focus on it. So my job as Sustainability Director, I have sort of three key areas. One is looking at direct impacts, sort of the energy, water, transport, procurement, waste, all those sort of typical things you think about when you're looking at managing festivals. We also look at the indirect impact of visitors. That's transport and accommodation. In common with most festivals and events, our biggest impact is all the people traveling to the festival. It's on average 80% of all carbon emissions come from all the people traveling to the festival or events rather than the actual event emissions themselves. So it's a key area of work for us is to try and reduce that. And as you can imagine, being where we are in a very rural area, it's a half an hour to the nearest train station. It's a significant issue for us to try and work on. And then the third area of my work is in engagement. And this is the area where I think we can have most impact. And that's in programming, in the workshops, innovation, community development, reaching people, talking to people, all those people who come to the festival, engaging with them and sending them away with new messages. So on to sort of what I mean about when I'm talking about sort of using festivals as research spaces. There's lots of research takes place on festivals and events, but it's mostly passive. It's mostly asking attendees their views and their attitudes, you know, from their economic impacts, cultural impacts, what their social backgrounds are, all these bits and pieces. It's about talking to them and finding out their views. This is one of the most recent ones I've come across, which is the research on biometrics, looking at music festivals. But once again, it's passive. It's the festival has implemented something, and then along come researchers and they ask questions about it and they find out interesting information, and it's all very interesting. And it's all very useful, but what I'm interested in is how we affect the big change outside of the festival once a visitor has returned to their normal life, and using festivals as active spaces where we can actually look at interventions and inventions to drive change. So using that very space to undertake experiments rather than just asking people their views on things. So very much an active use rather than a passive use of research. Right. So this is the passive research one. This is talking about our the biometrics which music festivals have been researching. And next slide. Active interventions. We just talked about that. So next slide. There we go. Right. Why festivals and events? They are the reason why I think they are such good places to use as research places is that there's a range of things which are true to most festivals and events. One is they're relaxed spaces. These are places where you've gone to enjoy yourself, and if you've gone to enjoy yourself, you're more open to new ideas. You're more open to suggestion. You're more open to conversations about change. They're also quite controlled spaces. There's normally a boundary around the outside of them. They are time bounded. They last for a certain time. There's a planning process. There's a whole range of information which is done to try and manage that space. So you can put very firm and interesting controls into your space. They're very focused. They often are, like I say, last for a certain length of time. There's a beginning and an end. You can do research beforehand, during, and after. And also, they're not normal. It's not the sort of space, it's not like your everyday life. And as I said before, they are, when you're outside your comfort zones, when you're relaxed and enjoying yourself, you are more likely to be willing to try new things, to be exposed to new ideas and experimentation. Next slide, please. And click again. And once more. And once more. There we go. Right. So, and the other reason why festivals are good spaces to work on, and this isn't a picture of Hay Festival, just in case you were thinking, I won't say which one it was, but it's clearly an issue. Two pieces of information, research done by Moore in Buckingham University in 2013, which is always useful when I'm talking to festival organisers about why they should make change. And one is that 50% of people approximately would pay a higher ticket price to make a festival greener, but also in this context, 43% have changed their behaviour as a result of the festival green initiatives. And this is what I think is what I'm particularly interested in, is that, you know, it's like say how we affect big change outside the festival, not necessarily during the festival. How do we actually spread the ripples beyond rather than just looking internally? Next slide, please. And there are two key areas, I think, where certainly I've been working on in terms of using the festival as a place for experimentation. One is looking at social change. How do you introduce new concepts and ideas into society? And as a government or as a state, driving change is really quite difficult. People are resistant to change. They do things the same way, and actually making people change is really quite difficult. It is difficult. Festivals give you a great opportunity to explore something new, and people have a bit more fun, a bit more relaxed, and therefore they are much more willing to try new things. And if you try these things in a controlled space, research it, you're much more likely to be able to, when they go back into society, back home, if they take those ideas and concepts with them. For example, e-bikes and using e-transport, the opportunity for people to test these things out when they're at events or spaces. Once they've had a go, when they get back, they go, oh, it's no longer this weird thing which they never knew before. Suddenly they've tried it, they've used it, they can see the applications for when they go back home. So you can effect that sort of change. It's a straightforward, really straightforward, easy social change. And on the other side, the practical inventions, actually using the festival as a space to trial out new ways of design or engineering. One of the things which we've been working with on is kinetic energy. We designed this competition with students, engineering students, looking at can they design kinetic energy generators to work on the festival side. We have a particular, this is a photograph of our one of our walkways, which is, we have these sprung walkways, they're basically wooden walkways. So every time you walk up and down, they actually do give and generate some energy. You transfer energy from your feet as you're walking across there. So the idea of the competition was to try and get students working, design different kinetic energy collectors. We've got a partner, Good Energy, who provided battery power to collect it. So it's an opportunity both for students to actually trial something out, to really give something a real bashing when you've got 100,000 people walking up and down things. So you can trial new ways of working, but also you can engage people in that concept. You can talk to people, they're interested in what's going on. So you have an opportunity to talk to people about the work and also to trial it and experiment with it. Next slide, please. One of the other things which we have as festivals is we have an awful lot of data, an awful lot of information which we can provide to and work with scientists and engineers in to look at ways of change. This is just an example of some of the waste from our main festival site and how we sort it and where it goes to. So as a way of actually looking at and then applying outside of the festivals, because festivals are essentially a microcosm of society. We do all those things. We eat, we travel there, we sleep around there, we enjoy life. We do all those things which you would normally do. And so if we, by using the data which you can collect in that microcosm, in that controlled environment, it gives really good examples and ways of actually saying, well, how do we transport that outside of and make a really big impact? So this just gives you an idea about what materials actually are generated, and this is very similar to normal life, and also then what you can do with it. Next slide, please. Reusable coffee cups, another example of where we've been working. Our user our main festival goer for the main festival site tends to be in the sort of the 40s plus. We do have a younger generation as well, but you know, our demographic is sort of 35 up to 55, 60, 70. That are notoriously more difficult to change than younger generations. So one of the things which we were working with some of the compostable, well, not the reusable coffee cup companies, was to see how do we actually make change, how do we inform customers and actually get them used to switching from a disposable cup system or a washable cup system, which we were using, to a reusable coffee cup. And this gives you some figures about how you can drive that change. You know, 2017 we had 350 full willy bins of coffee cups. We switched to a reusable cup, down to 25 full willy bins in the following year, and then down to 11. So a massive decrease. And what we also found is a lot of people the idea where you paid £1 and you got your coffee cup for the day, and you could give it back and get £1 back. But a lot of people were taking those cups back to reuse when they went home as well. And we've had photographs and we've had things from people who said, I'm still using my festival cup as I go around town. So all of a sudden, so by making people experience something in that environment, you drive change outside of it. You use that place to experiment and play and drive change. Next slide, please. This is a guy called Gary Charnock. He lives in Ashton Hayes, and one of the big things which festivals and places can do is to have those conversations which enable people to think about things differently. Gary came to an event in 2008 at Hay. It was an event with the Soil Association, and he went away from this talk and went back to his town, and he said, I'm going to make my town 100% carbon neutral within 10 years. The reason I know about it was he put it up in his local newspaper. I got a Google alert, so I found out about it. 10 years later, I got another Google alert saying Gary came to Hay 10 years ago. He said we were going to do it, get carbon neutral within 10 years. I haven't managed to achieve it, but I have managed to reduce the overall carbon emissions by 40% in Ashton Hayes. And that's one man coming to one event and going home and doing and driving change. And those ripples then spread out by people coming to your festival, and you have an opportunity to do that. Next slide, please. We've worked now with the Natural Environment Research Council, NERC, for 4 or 5 years now, on a project where we've been linking scientists and artists, very much how we were hearing earlier. And this was more about communications. How do we get better communications of science? There are some very notable, excellent excellent science communicators, but it's not always the number one skill of scientists, and that's not often why they go into science, is to communicate it, it's to do the science. So we team them up with some excellent communicators, some authors, illustrators, animators, to find these new ways of communicating the science. And this is a picture from our transmission one. This is a Chris Horton video you can see on the big screen there. He worked with a polar scientist called Emily Shuckburgh to produce this little animation about climate change, and we showed it then at the launch of the Sir David Attenborough research ship. So that opportunity to do something on the festival site, but then generate something which is then shown and change people around the globe is huge, the potential. Next slide, please. This is something else we've done, which is working with people to understand the impact of trees and planting trees. We created this virtual woodland with the Woodland Trust. Anyone who comes to the festival site can take away a free tree, but rather than just let them wander off, we take their postcode data, and so we can generate this virtual forest showing where all these trees have gone off across the country. And you can see, I think it's 3 years worth of data now. Each dot is a different year, and so you can see this virtual forest disappearing off. And it's another way of engaging people, making people think about what they're doing, and also having a direct impact. We've planted over 4,000 trees for just on this particular element of this project. Next slide, please. We also, in our Maldives Festival in 2010, public recycling was not something which was on the agenda at all on any of the 1,200 islands. We ran the first one as part of the festival, and what was fascinating about that was, from a research point of view, was that because it wasn't something which was used to being done, we had to run these loudspeaker announcements every sort of hour or so, explaining how it all worked and how the bins worked to an audience, so people actually understood what happened. But from following on from that, there are now public recycling schemes across the Maldives as a result, partly of this, but also obviously partly of the work of the various conservation agencies in there as well. Next slide, please. This is, I have an issue with conferences. I have an issue with those places where you go to, you walk into we've all been to a conference, you walk into a conference centre, they're pretty much all the same. They are beige, artificial lighting, it's a big room, you walk in there and you literally feel all the energy disappear. There is nothing ever good comes out of a conference centre. The best ideas, 2 a.m. at a party, you've had a couple of drinks, you're sitting there, you go, you know what we should do? This is what we should do. And okay, not always practical, but the inspiration comes from parties, from being relaxed and enjoying yourself. And that's what festivals and events do the best. So when you're looking at ideas, you're looking at ways of finding new ways of doing things. And that's what experiments, that's what scientists, that's what engineers are looking at, new ways of doing things. It's have them at festivals, engage with people, talk to them, and get their inspiration. Next slide, please. And this is my second final slide. As I mentioned earlier, this is all about creating ripples in the environment. The festivals and events are the stone. We are the one, we throw it in the pond, and we should be able to spread what we do far and wide beyond the festival site. And by engaging with science, by engaging with engineers, we have a real opportunity to not just look at what we do in our own backyard, but to when people go home, they actually take that change abroad, and we can actually affect change on a much bigger scale. And final slide, and that's me. Please get in touch if you've got any ideas. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Andy. That was really inspiring, and all three presentations, all different aspects that bring out different ideas. And one thing I just wanted to pick up straight away, really, Marcelo, with your presentation and how that might fit in with what Caroline said, is the importance of uncomfortable experiences. And how that engineering student said, no, I didn't like it. Well, perhaps I did. No, perhaps I did. And that kind of thing about how you can jar people out of their conditioned response, how you can affect change, and how art can do that through providing what could be seen as uncomfortable experiences, but they nevertheless have an intrinsic value, as Caroline said, as beauty as a way of recognizing value. So I wondered if you could, both of you, pick up on that, those sort of things, the idea of an uncomfortable experience in culture when you bring culture to engineering, for instance, and science, and vice versa, and how the kind of realization of beauty as a way of recognizing experience value. Have you got something on that, Marcelo?
Okay, yes, I have something to say. Well, this was very interesting, and it was all about bringing on comfort, actually, because it's from the beginning, how it was, the whole thing was set, was like, okay, bringing this very structured, very much thinking and using their heads, people, the engineering students, into a different context, and to interact with the artist, that it was a completely new experience. Some of the students, for example, some of the engineering students had never been exposed to the art, is said, from looking at pictures in one museum. So the whole story of experience, and more what seems to be an unstructured experience, but it was with an underlying different methodology in it. Was completely novel. So people at the beginning was like, and the students were used, the engineering students are used, okay, you have to do this and that, or define this and that. It's all a structure, it's all in steps. And so at the beginning, we said with Jacqueline, okay, well, just define, you have to define the problem. So they spent 1 month trying to define, and they were struggling, totally struggling. And for us, we acted as facilitators of this process. We didn't put ourselves in the role of, oh, I am the teacher, I am the lecturer, and you have to say no. We were kind of the facilitators, kind of letting things happen. And also requires very different skills from our side as educators, because we have to let the process, I mean, they have to come up with the idea. We have to create the space, like in the festival, you create a space that is conditioned for things to happen. So we did that, and I think the students found that at the beginning they developed a lot of anxiety. So we have also to be able to handle that, because they were anxious and like, okay, what am I doing with this kind of? So you have kind of to stand in the position of saying, yeah, we'll get to somewhere. And at the end, it was reflecting. It took a lot of reflection, and it took a lot of patience. And at the end, the reflection was very positive. They were all super happy with the results. They presented in 2 conferences. The students that created these big things, these big aspirins, and they were able to present that in a pharmaceutical conference. And so they were kind of the stars. I mean, that group was very interesting, because one of the students was always stuttering. And in my classes, he was always stuttering and very shy. The one, and then at the end, when he presented in the conference, he was kind of, yes, telling everything, and like with a super strong, like very much believing in what he was saying. And that was fabulous. And it was uncomfortable for all of them, and also for us that were the facilitators of these groups. And also there were many layers of co-production there. On one hand, the students, and on the other hand, working the artist and me working together. That there was a lot of their uncomfort in a sense, because we had very different ways. So yes, it's a way of learning through the uncomfortable, through the ugly. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and also one of the points I just wanted to bring forward from the last session was that paradox of using beauty as a way of expressing or exploring the ugly. And I wondered again, with that sort of paradox of the uncomfortableness and the kind of beauty, realizing of truth in beauty, or whatever, and that will mean that, you know, whatever that means, whatever that term beauty means in the wider sense. Is there anything that either of you'd like to comment about those things?
Andy, you go.
Okay. I think only that. I mean, from my perspective, I think. I mean, they are always. It's a idiom, but you know, beauty in the eye of the beholder. All those, you know, all those sort of classic sayings. But I think creating. It gets back to my point about a party being a space where you are relaxed and enjoying space. You're more open. If you are in a beautiful place, and that can be a beautiful building, can be a beautiful environment, it could be a beautiful state of mind, you are more likely to be open to being able to see things differently, to be able to explore things differently. And that might be exploring things which are ugly, but you're seeing it through that aspect. I think whilst if you but I mean, I suppose contra to that, being in an aggressive environment or a what might be called an ugly environment can equally inspire, but it tends to be more. I think beauty allows you to be more open and explore a wider approach to things. Where I think the ugly or the aggressive tends to focus the mind on that particular thing, and that can be closing. or it can actually make, if you can step back from it, you can, once you're exposed to it, you may be able to see things around it. But I think too much of the ugly and aggressive narrows you. You need to be able to have the beauty to be able to compare it to. But yeah.
Marcella.
One of the things that I think in both what Andy presented and one of the things that emerged there was the sense of community, which is very important. And for example, with I guess you have the same experience with the festivals, but for me, with the students, it was very nice to see how we developed a sense of community. At the end, we were the Beyond Technology people. So they kind of went through the struggle of doing all these different things. And this sense of community, interesting enough for some of them, they still remains. And so it's fantastic. And I think this also, by creating this community, is also a way also of generating change and then letting change to, letting these changes that happened, for example, in the festival or in the class, also to happen later on in life. So I think this is a way of extending the experience.
I think there was also what you were saying about communities and coming together and that challenge. You were saying about they had different views. When one of the projects, which I think I mentioned in my talk, the Transmission 2 one, it wasn't just based here in the UK. This last one we did it in Peru and in Colombia as well. So our festivals out there. And the Colombian pairing, which was with a Colombian author who'd worked a lot with the guerrillas, and that is the fighters, but not the monkeys. The people, the narcos. He'd been working in those environments. So he was coming at this from a very, very different perspective to what we're used to here. And when he presented his story, he wrote a story based on the work which was being taken place looking at in some of the jungle environments out there. And when he presented his story, which is written in the future, looking back, the initial reaction from people who read it was, my God, what's this talking about? It's a political diatribe about the misuse of resources. It's not talking about the environment, but it's precisely that. And it took a while to actually to work through that whole discussion to say, well, this is, your view of seeing it from a Western perspective is very different to the lived experience of someone who's actually seen and experienced, real political and social upheaval caused, and the impact that has on the environment. And you can't separate those two. And if that's the experience of the artist, then that is lived and that is valuable, and there's a discussion worth having. But it's quite interesting how it brings out the ugly, can bring out a sort of a whole different dimension when you're looking at something which people think, oh, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, treed canopy, and look at all this amazing research we're doing. Yes, but there's a human element in there, and that has to come through. You're muted, Jamie.
I suppose that motion of beauty does link back into a connection and relaxation that you have. I mean, The Haye is a very beautiful place and a beautiful setting. We're lucky to live near there as well, and I think, but also that notion that people talk about, that sort of the beauty in nature, if they're going for walks, even in parks or out in the countryside, and how that makes them connect to another part of themselves that is more reflective, that is more generous, that is more compassionate, that is more subject to kind of to not that kind of that sense of anxiety and problems that relate to the inability, the freezing in terms of the panic that we face in these situations of climate crisis and ecological crisis. So that does bring nicely back to that notion of biophilic art. And I'd like to also just ask both of you if you wanted to say anything else before we wrap up. Yeah.
In connections to that, to create the space also to be able to freely express what you feel. This is something that in these groups happened. For example, frustrations, like, okay, this is a completely useless experience. I have no idea what am I doing, why I'm spending the time, and what should I do, and etc., etc. A lot of things came out from students that has to do with feelings of frustrations, and then through time, actually, we gain more confidence. A lot of things came out. I mean, it was not a therapy session at all, but in a sense, to be able to let these things emerge and not repress, that I think it was great too, in a safe space, generate a safe space to let things to emerge, and it was okay. So it was okay to say this is useless, or it was okay to say this has been a fantastic experience.
Yeah.
So that sort of freedom out of a white box that is commonly the teaching classrooms and these very structured spaces in which we teach.
Well, yes, and Andy.
Just to sort of echo that, really, I think one of the things which festivals and events give you is that that room to make mistakes. Because they are, once again, you're in an atmosphere where people are open and willing to talk and engage. There is also more space for play and more space for trying things which you're not guaranteed to succeed with. And that's partly because they are relaxed, but it's also partly because they're annual. You know that next year I'll try something different. You know, if that doesn't work, let's learn from it and then try again the following year. So that room for mistakes, the room to learn from each year, room to explore, I think is what makes festival events great places for the scientists and engineers and others to work on and with as living labs, as places where people can experiment.
Thank you all, and I just want to say that the next session that everyone is invited to, and I'll get the audience to cross that, is to look at the next steps, to do a rounding up of some of the points and look at the next steps and perhaps the networks and funding applications we can make to make these things happen. I also just like to use this opportunity to thank all our participants. It's been a wonderful experience for me to listen to everybody. It's really important. There's lots of new ideas that have come out of this. So I'd like to thank the Sustainable Future Centre at Herefordshire New Leaf and Arts Council England for funding through the emergency funding application that we made there that helped this take place, and to University of Birmingham, BC3 and all our partners. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you in about 5 minutes time. Okay, thank you. Bye.